Hello, everybody. Welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker, former Comptroller General of the United States. I'm Nick Palavito. I'll be the moderator for today's presentation. And today we're going to look at something very important. I call it the Doge report. We're going to look at Doge because it's big in the news. We want to see what they're doing. Several weeks ago, we actually did discuss the Doge report. And we came to the conclusion there's no way they can cut $2 trillion. And part of it is because there wasn't $2 trillion to cut without destroying the military completely. In other words, got to get rid of all of our military. And as they say on Pawn Stars, that ain't happening. Okay, so what are we looking forward? The way I see it, the Doge as it moves forward. There's three different groups that took place over the last century, or the turn of the other century. One is the Grace Commission, which the Honorable David Walker knows a lot about, and hopefully he'll bring that up, that could transform what the U.S. is. The other two are Enigma, and that's when they brought together all these people, including Albert Turing and a whole group of chess players, believe it or not, who cracked the German code, the Enigma code. So the thing is, there are different things that we've seen in history, and the third one's the Manhattan Project. Now, I think the Manhattan Project and Enigma are much tougher than dealing with the federal budget. So if you get the right minds involved, I think you can turn this ship around. But if you don't, this ship will sink. So with that, we're going to bring in the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, who's been discussing this issue, but now it's become the forefront of everybody in the United States. So David, it looks like this is going to take over the media for quite some time because Elon Musk has picked up the mantle on Doge, and they're looking to cut government spending for the first time I've seen since Clinton balanced the budget, several decades ago. So what are your thoughts on Doge? Where are we going? Where are we going from here?
Well, it's good to be with you, Nick, and hopefully we'll have some more panelists join us. But let me give you a number of overview comments with regard to Doge. Let's start off with what it is and what it isn't. Doge is called the Department of Government Efficiency, which is a misnomer because A, it's not a department, and number two, it's not in government. In reality, it's more like an external advisory group. It hasn't been given the name commission or task force or whatever yet, but it's an external advisory group similar to the Grace Commission, which you referred to before, which is comprised of private sector persons, deputized by the President of the United States to be able to engage in certain activities. It's a little bit of an oxymoron to call it the Department of Government Efficiency because, as I said, it's not in the government, it's not a department, and frankly, the last thing we need is another government department. We got too many already, and hopefully that will be within the scope of their authority to potentially rationalize the number and nature of the departments and agencies that we have. It's headed by Elon Musk, globally known. Not much more needs to be said. Vivek Ramaswamy, a successful entrepreneur who ran for the Republican nomination. The two of them are very bright and creative people. They have the ability to be great spokespersons with the media, traditional media, as well as alternative media, as well as social media. So, that's something that didn't exist with the Grace Commission. You didn't have people that were as prominent as that, although Peter Grace was prominent. You didn't have multiple media outlets like all the cable networks. You didn't have X, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, et cetera, which has the ability to multiply the message through to various audiences through various means. And so I have said for years that something like Doge is much needed and long overdue. In fact, I was chairman back several years ago of an initiative called the Government Transformation Initiative, which was trying to get something like this going. So I think it's much needed, long overdue, and I sure hope it'll be successful. A few other things. One, how's it going to be operationalized? Presumably, the way that it'll be operationalized is through an executive order, I would guess, on day one, and an accompanying charter that would define what its mission and scope is and what authorities that it has. What's the scope likely to be? Most likely, it's likely to be to review the organization and operations of government to look for savings, and savings can come in many ways. It can come through spending reductions. There's two kinds of spending. There's front door spending, where you end up actually expending appropriated funds. There's backdoor spending, which is tax expenditures, and there are other actions that have a positive or negative impact on the economy, and that's things like government guarantees, as well as regulatory actions, if you will. I expect that spending broadly defined will be within their charter, and that regulatory actions most assuredly will be in their charter. But I think they're probably going to focus more on the organization and operations of government. They're not going to get into the issue of how do you reform Social Security, how to reform Medicare, in order to make them more solvent, sustainable, and secure. So what authority will they have? Well, the president will determine that, but since they're not government employees, they will be limited to what their authorities are. I would imagine that the president will give them access to all the people and information that they need in order to be able to do their job. At the same point in time, they're not going to have the authority to tell people to do anything. I mean, they're not going to be able to instruct people that you discontinue this, do that. All they really can do is make recommendations to the president. What are some of the things I think they'll focus on? I think they'll focus on the old proverbial fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement, of which there's plenty. They'll focus on a range of actions, dealing with acquisitions, dealing with human capital, dealing with property, dealing with a variety of things where there are clearly significant targets of opportunity to save significant sums. What type of information are they likely to rely upon? Well, the first thing I would do is I would look at the information that already exists. I mean, the Government Accountability Office, which I headed for about 10 years, has a high risk list. It publishes an annual report of duplication, overlap, and redundancy in the federal government. It, along with the inspectors general, publish annual reports on improper payments. There are plenty of other reports that have been issued by the GAO and the IGs that would be extremely valuable to this group, to Doge. In addition to that, I think you have to look at organizations like the Congressional Budget Office, the Joint Committee on Taxation, the various think tanks. There are individual members of Congress. In the past, you had Tom Coburn, may God rest his soul, who I dealt with quite a bit when I was Comptroller General. He's done a lot of good work in the past. In fact, his work resulted in the requirement to do the duplication, overlap, and redundancy report annually by GAO. You have Rand Paul, who ends up doing an annual report talking about areas of waste, if you will. And so there are plenty of sources. That, in addition to crowdsourcing information from the general public. I mean, that's one of the things that they've announced that they're going to do. But when they end up pulling all this information and doing the related analysis, the question is, what will they do then? Well, they're going to have to separate the wheat from the chaff between what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. In doing that, I don't think they should consider political feasibility. I think they should come up with what they think makes sense, not consider political feasibility, put it into three buckets. Bucket one, what theoretically the president can do through an executive order. Bucket two, what's going to require legislation. And bucket three, any items, if any, that will require a constitutional amendment. Then the president will have to decide what does he want to do. The president, will also have to decide what type of legislation he might want to submit to the Congress, and or the commission can try to also work with the Congress to get legislation introduced up on the Hill. But that's going to require a coordinated effort between the executive and legislative branch. And realistically, it's going to require bipartisan support to get anything enacted into law because of the close margins in both the House and the Senate. They're also likely to do budget reconciliation to the maximum extent possible, either this year and or next year, in order to be able to avoid a filibuster in the Senate which requires, normally you have to have 60 votes, but if you go on budget reconciliation and if it relates to fiscal matters, you only need 50 votes. What's their timeline? They're supposed to issue a final report by the 200th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, which is July 4th, 2026. How will they report? In my view, they ought to report recommendations periodically, and then they ought to issue their final report no later than July 4th, 2026. I mean, they shouldn't wait to the very end to be able to make all these recommendations. There are a lot of things that can and should be acted on, in a much more timely fashion than that. How much savings are they likely to achieve? Well, Elon Musk has already said that he thinks that $2 trillion a year is too ambitious a target. He would be happy if they hit $1 trillion a year. My view is if it's properly designed and effectively implemented, they can get several $100 billion a year. That's significant. But there's a lot more that will need to be done after that through some of the actions that I've talked about before, such as a statutory fiscal sustainability commission and a constitutional amendment that will force Congress to make tough choices on spending and revenues if necessary on a recurring basis so that we can restore fiscal sanity and sustainability. Beyond specific cost savings, I think they're also likely to look at regulatory actions. Hopefully, in addition to things that might be able to be done short term, they'll also look at structural changes that might be able to happen. We don't have a strategic plan. We don't have key national indicators to understand what's working and what's not working and how we compare to others. We need human capital reforms. The human capital policies that we're following in the federal government are based on the conditions that existed in the 1950s. And so there's a number of issues there that need to be modernized to make it more future focused, results oriented, and sustainable. What concerns do I have? Well, as I said, I think it's much needed, long overdue. I support the effort wholeheartedly. I do have some concerns, and those concerns, quite frankly, are shared by many people, although privately in most cases, including on Capitol Hill. And that is that, one, the people that I've interacted with who are associated with Doge are very energetic, are bright, are enthusiastic, but many of them are very naive about the differences between the private sector and the government. The private sector, is very different. Let's take one example. I mean, Elon Musk, who's, brilliant, okay, and extremely accomplished, and is one of the two co-chairs here. A lot of people point to when he took over Twitter, or formerly Twitter, now X. Well, he was the CEO, presumably chairman of the board, although I'm not sure of that. He was the majority shareholder, okay? So when you have that much power, you can do a lot of things, especially when your workforce is not unionized. So he was able to make dramatic and fundamental reforms very quickly. You compare that to the government, where the culture is totally different, the most highly unionized sector of the economy, where the performance management systems are, in many cases, worthless. You don't separate the wheat from the chaff between the truly top performers and the ones that really should be released. You have much more transparency. You've got arguably the most difficult board of directors to deal with on the face of the planet. It's called the U.S. Congress. And so it's just very, very different from the government. Yes, there are transferable concepts from the private sector to the public sector, but there are a lot more obstacles in the government. I've had the good fortune of being able to do transformational change in all three sectors of the economy. By definition, the government was by far the most difficult of any. As head of GAO, we made transformational changes to make it smaller, more efficient, more effective, more respected. And the changes that we made took quite a bit of time over several years and are transferable and scalable to other parts of government with the right kind of leadership and commitment. And hopefully we'll get that in this new administration, but time will tell. So what are some of the past efforts that I'll mention and we'll close on, and then we'll open it up to our panel? The way I look at this is that this is a modern day Grace Commission on steroids. As I said before, The two co-chairs here are much better known, much more visible than Peter Grace was, although he was obviously very successful and respected. We've got many more forms of communication today. Frankly, there's a lot more opportunity for savings today than there was back. But you also have to keep in mind that the Grace Commission, made about 2,500 recommendations, and a relatively small percentage of those were ever implemented. And so, you want to look at the recommendations they made, but you also want to understand, why were so few implemented, and what, if anything, can be done now in order to significantly increase that percentage. So I look at Doge as a Grace Commission on steroids, and clearly the President of the United States, President-elect Donald J. Trump, is very supportive of this, and clearly it's much needed and long overdue. So, as they say, fasten your seatbelt and get your popcorn. It's going to be interesting.
Okay, that's certainly a good opening statement. I think that we're going to go bring in our panel, but I see this to be, if you do this properly, beyond the Grace Commission, because Grace, there's no movies made about it. They did make a movie about Enigma, which was breaking the code, and they actually had Al Turing who headed it up, but there was a whole group of people that you missed. They were all international chess masters. Seriously, like so when you look through their CVs, there are all these chess masters who broke the Enigma code. Then there was the Manhattan Project, headed up by Oppenheimer. We had all these brilliant people to break the code to be able to make the atomic bomb. What Elon Musk needs is a group of people like that to push this thing through, so that we do have some changes, because it's a little bit more politically sensitive, but intellectually it isn't. But we do have intellectual giants on this, and we're going to bring in a chess expert who heads up our chess show. Yeah, go on.
And let me mention real quick, I agree with you that we ought to look to those experiences, and I agree that we ought to involve people like that. No question about that. Here's one of the concerns that I have. We can draw upon great people, we can draw upon great work, but Elon Musk and Vivek, as bright and capable as they are, they have zero government experience. And the federal government is very different than the private sector. And so one of the things that I'm concerned about is that who's going to end up working with them, and all the different people who are involved, including the kinds of people that you're talking about, to be able to pull this thing together to maximize the chance of success. And they have not named an executive director. And to me, that will be a fatal flaw if they don't do that, because you can't have everybody going out doing their own thing, especially when you don't have the authority to tell anybody what to do,
Right.
Beyond your own staff, if you will, without having somebody who is dedicated to the cause, has got related experience, and has credibility on both sides of the political aisle, because many of what they will recommend, I guarantee you, will require legislation. And you will not.
Well, you need an Oppenheimer or a Turing to
Yeah.
take care of the Chode Alexander, who was an international master on Enigma, and people like Albert Einstein. But we have our own chess experts. We have Sasha Starr, bright guy out of Canada, who could help us. And we have Rick Rosner, as one of the world's highest IQs, who could actually help the Doge. And he has some thoughts on this, I guess. So we'll bring up Rick.
No. I mean, but I have a semi-unrelated question. So the California was going to have a budget surplus. That was before last week, and now the state has suffered. They're saying between $100 billion and $150 billion worth of damage. 12,000 homes lost and other buildings. So, what are the economic implications for this? That's an average of $2,500 per citizen of California. How does this shake out?
Well, first, I don't believe for a second that California was going to have a budget surplus on a credible basis of accounting. Okay, California is a basket case financially. And it, like many states, end up wanting to say they have a surplus when all they do is balance cash flows rather than employ accrual-based accounting concepts. And when you employ accrual-based accounting concepts, they're in bad shape. Now, the 100 to 150 billion, by the way, that's the current estimate, as you know, Rick, and you're out there, so you know this a lot better than we do. But it's going to go up. It's going to go up, but then you have to segment those costs.
Yeah.
All right,
it keeps growing. A couple of days ago, it was 57 billion, so it could be 200 billion.
Right. So the question is, how much is it, and how do you segment it? How much of it relates to the state? How much of it relates to the LA? How much of it relates to the county? How much of it relates to the federal government? How much of it relates to private insurance? And how much are individuals going to have to absorb on their own? Okay. I mean, the federal government has stepped in. I mean, Joe Biden all of a sudden found some money. I mean, he couldn't find money to deal with Western North Carolina, which is primarily Republican, but he didn't have any problem saying, well, we got all the money we need, and we'll reimburse 100% of certain costs for LA, which is predominantly Democratic. So I'll just leave it at that. But my point is that that's FEMA, okay? And FEMA helps for a period of time. They help with regard to, temporary living expenses and other things of that nature for a period of time. But FEMA is not in the business of reimbursing people for their lost houses, okay? And part of the problem there, Rick, as you know, is a lot of the insurance companies dropped,
Right.
dropped a lot of these people, and a lot of these people are uninsured. That's one thing if you're, if you're a movie star or something like that, and you got plenty of money. It's another thing, if you're not and you don't have plenty of money, and if that was your largest investment. So we'll have to see how that plays out. This is going to have a serious impact at all levels of government, and in particular on the individuals that are directly affected. And you also have to analyze, how did this happen? What caused this? I mean, in my view, there's a couple of things that are clear, and I'm not going to mention names. California's had a water problem for a long time, okay? And it clearly has not done enough with regard to being able to deal with that through, having enough reservoirs and things of that situation. Okay. Secondly, California hasn't done a very good job, and it's not the only state, in fairness, okay, has not done a very good job of defoliation, okay, and cleaning out the brush and things of that nature, okay. California hadn't done a very good job in LA of setting priorities for, where should we be spending our money? I mean, for example, LA ended up significantly reducing the budget for the fire department, right? And so I think we have to.
It was that's people argue about that, but the fire department budget, 820 million. So the possible reduction was 17 million, which is 2%, along with cuts to a bunch of other departments. But that then people argue, no, it was really increased by 50. People are arguing, but it's peanuts compared to the overall budget.
Right. Yeah.
But the overall budget is seriously deficient, has been revealed to be deficient by what happened.
Right. And so we need to do that. But
we haven't, I said it last hour, that LA hasn't built any new firehouses since the 60s. They may be remodeled, but they haven't added any, and the population has doubled.
I'm assuming you're talking 1960s rather than 1860s.
quite some time.
You're supposed to laugh at that, buddy.
I mean, all we had was the gold rush.
No, but that was in Northern California, not Southern California.
Yeah.
Okay. And by the way, for the record,
it's too bad it's not the 1860s, because then we could pay for it with gold. 1860s was about pulling gold out of the.
It's not a government function to bail out Californians who live in wealthy homes.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Don't have insurance. I mean, but we have different views, and so we're going to bring in.
Can I mention one other thing real quick?
Steve.
For the record, Rick, you have a much higher IQ than the two people that are in charge of this project, even though they're brilliant.
Hello, David Walker. It's good to see you. My first time seeing you in the new year.
But my Twitter handle is dumbass genius, which reflects that I do a lot of stupid stuff. I'm not sure you want me in charge of anything.
I didn't say that. I'm just stating for the record what your IQ is as compared to
I
others.
mean, just look at my hair. Just look at my hairdo.
But David, I have a quick question.
Yeah,
I mean, I've heard others say that, is the federal government that inefficient? I mean,
Hell yeah.
I mean, do you believe that, what tangible things do you think can be done, or is this just, some people just get so skeptical that it's political fodder, that it's just talk. I mean, or do you really think there's some opportunities here?
Well, first, I think you have to separate between transactional and transformational. Okay. Transactional is, are there areas that we can cut spending? Are there areas where we can cut regulation? Are there things that we can do that could have, an immediate impact, if you will? All right. And then you talk about transformational. Transformational is, what can we do to change what government does and how government does business in order to be able to have a much greater and lasting effect over time. And let me just mention a few things, okay? Number one, the U.S. government, despite there being a law that requires them to have it, still does not have a strategic plan, okay? A government-wide plan. Focuses on economic, national security, diplomatic, domestic issues. What are we trying to do? How do we measure success? We still don't have it, okay? Secondly, we don't have a set of key national indicators, outcome-based indicators saying, okay, you name the area, whether it's education, whether it's transportation, whether it's energy, whether it's the environment, whether it's national security. What are we trying to accomplish? How do we measure success in outcome-based terms? Are we getting better or worse? How do we compare to others? Therefore, we can end up setting better priorities. We can separate the chaff between what's working, what's not working. In the absence of that, what happens is that people end up focusing on how much money am I spending? How many regulations am I issuing? How many people do I have control of? Those are inputs. They're not outcomes, and we have to focus on that.
Well,
Hold on. A couple of other things real quick. If you look at our human capital policies and practices, they make no sense. They're based upon how the U.S. was structured in the 1950s with regard to the classification system, with regard to the compensation system, with regard to the performance appraisal system, and our acquisition practices, have real challenges. Last comment: Congress is a big part of the problem here. Congress, in many cases, is the one that wants the executive branch to do things that they don't want to do. They want to maintain facilities, whether they be the Postal Service or whether they be military bases. They want certain things to be purchased, even though they don't make sense to be purchased based upon current and future threats. That's like weapon systems, if you will. So that's why I'm saying there's lots of opportunity, but much of it will require legislation.
fantastic. Well, let's hope they get this done.
Let's rock.
Okay, any comments you have to Toby? I know you're just waiting in the background to give the rest.
He's having fun.
Yeah.
I mean, you always gotta have fun. That's the best part about it.
I see you big and eat too. I'm looking right behind you.
Oh yeah. I'm hungry. I'm fat for a reason, Dave. I like to eat.
Yeah.
I think the big thing is, and Dave, you hit on it all the time. We don't have a plan. We don't have a plan for the future because why? We don't know what we want to do. And we get so bogged down in the conspiracy theories, to the social things, to complaining about this person taking money from me, and we got to figure out a plan, exactly where we want to go and what the future is. And we're not thinking about that because we're stuck in battles of the past. And I think that's my big problem. And we're trying to swing for the fences when we come for these things. And this is where my big fear, again, with Doge comes from, is because it is no more than a trial balloon for an oligarchy, because there's nothing, there's no government accountability for Doge. There's nothing to go into the background of the individuals that joined Doge. They're just rich people who supposedly say that they're trying to help for the goodness of their heart. But the head of Doge has so many contracts tied up with the US that everything he does is a conflict of interest. He, for example, with Tesla is battling the issue with self-driving cars, and they're trying to get past that. And one of the court cases and the investigations into Tesla is around self-driving cars. But now he can cut that red tape around self-driving cars, and self-driving cars, Tesla leads the actual world in actual accidents around self-driving cars. So he has a vested interest in saying, hey, let's get past this. And we already know that he has the ear of the individual that's going to take office, because we saw that when we're going to see that easily between he and Bannon, because Bannon doesn't have any money, Elon Musk does. So Trump is going to lean towards whatever Elon Musk says. Trump campaigned on, hey, we're going to basically do mass deportations no matter who it is. And now he's saying he wants to fight for, and he's always been for H-1B visas, when the man in 2016 said that he's going to pull every H-1B visa.
So Indian support, man. The Indians there's a bunch of Indians going to the inauguration now.
Yeah, and so that is all based on Elon Musk saying, hey, look, I need H-1B visas. I use those in my companies. Vivek saying the same thing. I use H-1B visas in my company. Now he's changed his tune. So it's just, this is why I'm not really a fan of Doge. There hasn't been anything different to show me that it's not a trial balloon for an oligarchy.
All right. Well, several things. One, I understand your concerns. Okay. Let me just remind you of certain things. Okay. First, this is a external advisory group. It has no power whatsoever to do anything other than to make recommendations. Secondly, its recommendations will have to go to the Office of Management and Budget, who will then have to be part of the process of segmenting them between, what can be done by the president in theory through executive order, what's going to require legislation, what might require a constitutional amendment. Obviously, there will be a lot of people that will be advising the president other than just Vivek and Elon with regard to which recommendations that relate to executive orders he should accept and not. Obviously, the Congress is a major check and balance on anything that's going to require legislation. Oh, yeah, the margins are so close. Don't kid yourself. Let me finish. Yeah. All right. The major check and balance on anything that will require legislation. And it'll have to be bipartisan. If it's not bipartisan, it'll never happen. All right. And thirdly, there will be a subsequent review. For example, when the Grace Commission did its work, all right, the GAO, which I headed for 10 years, did an extensive review, analysis, and issued a report on all the recommendations. And so, there will be a number of potential checks and balances, but I appreciate your points.
The reason I can't trust the quote unquote checks and balances, for example, the legislative or the judiciary is supposed to be a check and balance on the executive. Trump already went to Alito, and when Trump was trying to get the blocking of the reports, and also the holding where he could delay the sentencing that was going on in New York, he went to Alito. That is something that should have been tossed out, and it should have been a 9-0 judgment, but no, it switched over to a 5-4 disagreement in the Supreme Court, which it should never have been. And then on top of that, Alito, the man he talked to about that case, voted in Trump's favor. And then if you look at every one of the individuals that Trump is putting up, every one of the individuals has some tremendous problems and should not be there. We should not have the head of WWE in the education department, the area that they're already going to take away, that they already said they were going to do. We should not have Hegseth, a Fox News contributor, talking head as DOD. those are individuals that should not make it, but will, because everyone in the Congress is actually bending the knee right now to whatever Trump says. And so when we're talking about,
I wouldn't go to the bank on that. Okay. I wouldn't go to the bank.
And then just to push through what we were saying, that it has to be bipartisan, it doesn't, because Trump, who's already pushing Mike Johnson to do everything through reconciliation, so therefore it doesn't have to be. So it's just a matter of that side has not shown any pushback. It's shown a lot of bending the knee. So my big concern still sits where Doge comes in, because again, I point out that Trump, who was so adamant about taking away H-1B visas until Elon said, no, I need those. Then he changed his tune quickly. It's the same way he changed his tune very quick with just another example.
Hold on.
David Walker, I just want to say bye. I've got to run, but I'll be reaching out to you on something else. Thank you all so much. We're going to bring you back on radio. Thank you.
Understand, Jatovi, okay? I happen to know a lot of members of Congress and a lot of members of the Senate, okay? And do not underestimate the fact that there are members on the Republican side. I mean, the Democrats are virtually united, okay, whether it's meritorious or not. They're virtually united on a lot of these things. But there are members on the Republican side that are not going to automatically go along with what the president wants, whether it be with regard to confirmations, okay, or whether it be with regard to pieces of legislation. And also with regard to budget reconciliation, there are strict rules as to what can be part of budget reconciliation and what can't. You can't put extraneous matters that don't have a meaningful and direct effect on fiscal issues on budget reconciliation. And so, we'll see. As I've said before, buckle your seatbelt and get your popcorn, okay? But I want to hear from Sasha too, because I know that he's a chess master. So I'm figuring that he's going to have some good ideas here of what we ought to be doing,
Well, first of all, as I spoke on previous show about the Trump's idea of having Canada as a 51st state. It's not a new idea. And basically, Trump is testing waters, how far away he can get by with any ideas or so. And especially now, he abandons now all his election promises. And now when he's realizing it's not so simple, so he's deflecting. For example, promise to make a peace in Russia and Ukraine. He understands it's not going to happen in 1 day or 100 days or even 300 days. So now he's cleverly avoiding any talks about this. And he has now come up with ideas of Greenland, Canada, and all that stuff. There's a few words about Greenland. So he's now starting the tariffs against Denmark as to bring Denmark a little bit closer to give him control over Greenland. Now, Denmark supplies 75% of certain drugs to the United States, including very popular drug Ozempic, and also a couple of other drugs. So obviously Denmark will be able to retaliate, same as Canada will retaliate. On Wednesday, there is a meeting of all provincial premiers of Canada in Ottawa, and the main topic is the punishing tariffs against the United States. Now, if they will unite Canada, Denmark, and now Elon Musk is quite vocal against UK, he is vocal against Germany and maybe a few other nations here and there. So there could be retaliatory action of all European countries and Canada together, and probably Mexico just as well. And I would like to see what and how much it will cost American taxpayers, the frivolous behavior of Donald Trump and where it leads America. It has nothing to do with the promises that he was making during his election campaign, and based on that, he was elected by American people. So now all of a sudden there is no more speaking about this Doge, Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk. Now, a little bit background of these people, because I have a feel that you're trying to idolize them. I'm a little bit against that, because Vivek Ramaswamy is very he is a mind how to squeeze profit where ordinary people wouldn't be able to do it. For example, he's taking control of the company which in pharmaceutical industry in UK, which failed for critical test. Yet he is cleverly taken over for next to nothing of this company, creates a new company in the United States which owns this company, does the fifth test, which failed, obviously, and all investors lost the money simply because the stock collapsed right after that. That's type of businessman who is now in charge of so-called Doge. With Elon Musk, it's much worse than that, because now it's becoming obvious facts of his biography. It's well known that his grandparents were prominent members of Nazi Party in Canada before they moved to South Africa. And his grandparents, his father, they were prominent Nazi supporters. And the table book in their house, which Alan, of course, was privy to, was a book published in English in 1952 by Werner von Braun, the prominent scientist and engineer from Germany. Now, the book is a science fiction about colonization of Mars. And the colonizers were living in tunnels in Mars. And the ruler of that colony in Mars was a man by the name Elon. That's where the name Elon was coming from and why he was giving that name. So Elon is a prominent fascist sympathizer and Nazi. And this is what you are giving a prominent role in a government control of the United States. It's to the so-called, and by the way, Musk, he is not brilliant scientist. He has not invented a single thing. The companies that he was buying, they were already built by somebody else. And when he was buying control of the company, he stipulated that he would be named as either founder or co-founder of the company. That's about his scientific prowess. So I'm sorry, but I disagree with the meaning of Ramaswamy and Elon Musk as the rescuers of U.S. government.
Well, let me just say that I appreciate your opinion, and I don't idolize anybody, okay, other than God and His Son. All right. Secondly, that you can't blame Elon or anybody else for what their parents may or may not have done. If you did that, you'd have a problem with JFK because of his dad, who was in his relationships to Germany. So I don't think we want to go there. But the other thing I would say, and this is humorous, Sasha, okay, I'm saying this up front. Personally, I think Canada deserves to be more than one state. But in any event, who's next?
Well, the thing is, I just have some comments about oligarchies. I know that Jatovi's totally against them, but I'm not. Oligarchies and dictatorships are actually very efficient. A lot of businesses are run that way. And frankly, a whole country called China is run that way. And it's a very efficient country. If you look at the metrics of China versus the United States, China is beating the tar out of us, number one. Number two, please don't knock Linda McMahon, because she's a friend of ours on LinkedIn, and she's probably listening to this broadcast. So the thing is, I wouldn't hit Linda McMahon, nor would I hit the oligarchs, because the thing is, They have been proven to be efficient, where you can see our current administration, how we're running things, is totally inefficient, or you wouldn't have $36 trillion in debt.
Just to point out, I did not Linda McMahon. Linda McMahon she's done well with the WWE, but the thing is, she should not be head of the education department. That's not a knock. That's like saying, Nick, you're awesome with Pod TV, but you should not be running the intelligence department. It's not a knock on you. But also a quick thing, just to back up what Sasha was saying about Elon Musk. Elon Musk currently, and this is where his election meddling is coming into play, he's doing that in Germany. He's backing the AfD. The AfD has ties to neo-Nazis. So it's not really that holding Elon to the faults of his parents. It's holding Elon to the faults of himself. So yeah, that's definitely an issue that he hasn't given up, pushing these.
In defense, real quick, and then we'll go to Mark.
Yeah.
I know Linda McMahon. Okay, I lived in Connecticut for about 9.5 years and had some interaction with her. You may want to do a little bit more homework, because she has been very actively involved in the education area. She's been a strong supporter of education. She was on the board of at least one, if not more, universities up there. So she's not a newcomer to education.
This isn't a knock on Linda McMahon. Okay. Linda McMahon is a phenomenal individual. I've said that. But Linda McMahon should not be head of education, the education department, because even though she's active in the education community, when was she superintendent of a district? When was she dealing with a whole bunch of other things that the head of the education department is going to deal with? There's nothing wrong with Linda McMahon. Her background does not put her to the status of being able to run the education department. So that's my only knock. There are other things back there. So it's not enough.
One of the big things is going to be
$1 billion company. You have much more qualifications than a superintendent of some school somewhere.
But again, your fault is that you're saying a business owner is just the perfect person to run a department in government. We have pointed out, which we all agree on, that government runs different than business. So an individual who has more of an understanding of that field is much more qualified than the individual that you're saying. It's the same thing that I said about other individuals. So saying a truth about somebody is not knocking somebody. I shouldn't be the head of the economics field, but I know some things I shouldn't be the head of a department in technology, but I know a ton about technology. It's not a knock. It's just being honest. So we've got to.
In fairness, Jacoby, one of the big debates that's going to be had during this administration, rightly or wrongly, is what is the federal government's role with regard to education? All right. And should there even be an education department, or should there be a major restructuring of government where we actually start pulling some things together that deal with the most valuable asset this country has, and that's called its people. And when you look at it from a human capital standpoint, education is one a much bigger puzzle, which includes immigration policy. HB1 is not going to go away, but it definitely needs reform. There's no question about that. Yeah.
So in terms of the education department, yes, the federal government has a role to play in the education department. For example, a lot of the funds that come from, and this is where we tend to forget about individuals that the education department touches, like the special needs community. That special needs community is affected heavily by that education department and the funds that come from that education department. Because if we take away the education department, where are those special needs communities going to get a lot of that funding that deals with that? That is a problem.
There's a difference, though, and let me just leave it at this. There's a difference between a program and a department, okay? One of the things that you can say is, all right, what should the federal government do? How should it do it? Where should it be done? What are we trying to accomplish? How do you measure success? I mean, that's the way that we ought to be looking at a lot of this. My personal view is we have way too many departments and agencies. And for every department and agency that you got your own bureaucracy, you got your own overhead, you got your own silo that, are you communicating with the other people? They ought to, believe me, I've always been a big believer in the
I completely,
silos.
I completely agree with you on that, David. And this is why with the education department, there has to be some federal oversight, because if you look, even if we're not even talking about special needs and how that's dealt with, and we're talking about just departments themselves and dealing with the understanding of investment, because we do know that education is our biggest investment in the future. And if you look at homeschooling, which is not regulated at all, you have homeschool areas, and this isn't a knock on homeschools, but this is one of those things where we have to have some type of regulation, because right now we have some homeschools that are teaching that being a Nazi is positive. And that's happening because it's unregulated. And it's actually well documented that these schools that are teaching these bad things are popping up in these homeschool areas. But how can that, and this is an area where the federal government across the board can come through and say, hey, look, we've got to take care, we have to deal with the actual growth of the homeschool market. Yes.
Just really quickly,
waiting for a while.
I just had a quick question for you, because I know that you mentioned it earlier, and it's been an area that's had a hard time being approved, any of them and everything. So I was just wondering, Dave, in your mind, what is an area in this whole conversation that will have to go down a constitutional amendment, and how will that process work, and which areas do you think would be effective? Because I do remember being a child of the 70s and having gone to college and stuff in the 80s, the whole conversation around the ERA and a number of other times that we've tried to do a constitutional amendment, and it is oftentimes a difficult process. So I just wonder, what do you see as an area that must have a constitutional amendment, and how will that process work in your the way you're thinking it would be framed?
I'll give you an example.
Yes.
I'm directly involved in this. The only way you can restore fiscal sanity and sustainability over time is a constitutional amendment on fiscal responsibility that will require the Congress and the president to work together to stabilize debt to GDP at a reasonable and sustainable level, lower than what it is now over a period of years, which will force them to have to make tough choices on a recurring basis with regard to spending and with regard to revenues. Okay. There are other things that could be coupled with that. All right. One example is a line item veto for the president. That would require a constitutional amendment. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying, keep in mind what they're focusing on is, how can you, they're focused primarily on spending and regulations. Okay. But we have a disease. We have fiscal cancer. The Congress has lost control of the budget. We've lost control of our finances. We have to restore it. So that's an example of something that would require a constitutional amendment. I've heard conversations about term limits. Well, term limits don't directly relate to fiscal responsibility. Okay. There are pros and cons to term limits, but if you want term limits, it clearly would require a constitutional amendment. Same thing for campaign finance. That's not something I think directly relates to what Doge is doing. Okay. But if you're concerned about money in politics and the fact that a lot of decisions with regard to spending and taxes and things of that nature, are the result of the fact that there's too much special interest money in politics. If you want to do anything with regard to campaign finance, that takes a constitutional amendment in light of the Supreme Court decision. Okay. But the one that's the most directly relevant to me, Mark, is a fiscal responsibility amendment.
Okay. I was just wondering, because I know that the ERA and others have had a difficult time getting that approval. Because what is it? Does it have to be a majority of the states?
Here's why that is, Mark. Okay. You have to have 3/4 of the states ratify it. Okay. Right. That's 38 states. All right. So it's got to be broadly acceptable. All right. The second thing is that the ERA amendment had had a date that it had to be done by. All right. The states, most of them aren't like that. For example, the 27th Amendment, which is the latest amendment, which deals with congressional pay. A high school student, I think it was high school, maybe college, but I think it was high school, discovered that a loophole in that it was still active, all right, even though it was originally part of the Bill of Rights and didn't get ratified as part of the Bill of Rights, okay? And it was ratified over 200 years after it was proposed.
Wow.
Because there was no date in it, unlike the ERA.
Gotcha.
Another thing they point out is that this was pointed out by several law firms, David, if we don't do anything and we continue on this path, that our, by I think it was around 2050, our debt to GDP ratios would be over 122%. We'll have over $50 trillion in debt, and 6.9% of our GDP will be going to service the debt. In other words, if we don't do anything, what happens, we are heading down a path that Argentina went down already with basically double-digit inflation.
Wow.
So the thing is, Argentina is showing a metric where they're actually turning that country around by cutting their budgets tremendously. So they brought their inflation down from like 10% per month to about 2% a year. So the thing is, this is something very important, because if we don't do this, the United States is going to flip. In other words, it will flip into an Argentina, Venezuelan style economy, which I don't think anybody wants.
Let me mention real quick, but I've got to go. I apologize. You guys can continue. I got to go. But let me just say this, okay? When you look at total debt, which is the debts on the debt clock, debt subject to the debt ceiling, we are already at an all-time record. We're at about 125% of debt to GDP, and we're headed up to well over 150, 160% by 2050 if we do nothing. And those projections are based on totally unrealistic assumptions. They're based upon the assumption, for example, that all the tax cuts will expire. That's not a realistic assumption. They're based upon the fact that we won't have any serious recessions. We won't have any military conflicts. We won't create any new government programs. Those are totally unrealistic. So it's actually much worse. Thank you so much. All the best.
We'll see you. Bye-bye.